Robert is right. We've been working on this concept, this collaborative concept, for quite a while. The Tulare Basin Wildlife Partners turned into the Tulare Basin Watershed Partnership Network. We're expanding it out. We're encouraging collaboration. We don't care where you come from relative to institutions or backgrounds or history or whatever. We want you to be part of a continuing conversation. As Robert was saying, you're going to meet people you haven't met before. Well, I know you all, and you're all my friends, and I'm glad to have you as acquaintances. I just have not met some of you before, that's all. We didn't know it. We're on the continuum. We're now joining up with each other, and we're going to attack the future, like Logan said, and make it a better place here. As you can see, I'm not the black-haired person that I used to be, and probably have the fewest number of years left compared to some of the people up here, and I plan on doing a lot of good before I go. So hopefully you'll join me, and you'll do the same, no matter how old you are, how engaged you've been, and we'll continue doing this. This is our inaugural State of the Basin. The room is pretty populated today. We're pretty pleased. Next year, we're hoping that it's going to be bigger, and we're going to grow this thing, and every year we'll have a chance to come back and talk about the Tulare Lake Basin and how we're making positive change to it, whether, again, economically, agriculturally, sociologically. Sociology, that's the main problem. Sociology. You're going to hear that a few times probably today. We can do engineering, we can do hydrogeology, we can do geology, we can do all that stuff. Sociology, now there's a challenge for all of us in this room, and we're all equally qualified to deal with it. With that in mind, we've asked someone today to come who is committed essentially a good portion of what I would say the middle of his life at this point, to water in California. He was born in the Coachella Valley, raised in the Coachella Valley, went to UC Santa Barbara, got an English degree. I have to say that because I went to UC Davis, and my qualifications for engineering and hydrology, I'm an English major also. So two of us have something in common. I'm a UC person, and I'm an English major, so there you go. He was appointed by Governor Jerry Brown to the State Water Board in 2017. He was appointed by the current Governor Newsom to be chairman of the State Water Resources Control Board in 2019 and reappointed to the board in 2021 for an additional 4-year term, and probably longer if things go the way they should. But anyway, I have the pleasure today of introducing to you the chairman of the State Water Resources Control Board, Joaquin Esquivel.
That was very kind. I really appreciate the kind introduction. And it's an incredible honor, an absolute honor. And I mean that as deeply as I can say it, to be here at this inaugural event. And in a basin that has seen such incredible change and will continue to see such incredible change as we all adapt to what are, I know at times, really anxiety-inducing circumstances. The drought that we continue to face, almost as a continuum of conditions and in the height of 2014 and 2015, means that a lot of the discussions that were set into motion in that time frame. I think the drinking water work that's happening in the basin, I think of Sigma, I think of all the things that spurred us to try to imagine a more sustainable future together at that moment, but to have conditions, again, be even worse in some cases, and in some ways, because it's so close to the last drought, accelerate those discussions. And for all that tension that I think it's important to acknowledge out there, it's incredibly exciting because we are in the midst of a generational transition. We are here more empowered by information and an ability to here have a vision that's in common together, that's informed by what is the best of us. And so, I'll take a step back. I am chair of the state board, but first I'm Joaquin Esquivel, and I'm from the Eastern Coachella Valley. I grew up there. My grandparents on both my mother and my father's side settled there. On my father's side, they were migrant farm workers going from Buckeye, Arizona, picking cotton back when there was cotton in Buckeye, Arizona, into the Coachella Valley for table grapes and citrus, and then up through the Central Valley, going to Gilroy for garlic. Half of the family settled in Bakersfield, the other stayed in Buckeye, and so the Coachella Valley was the middle that my grandparents ultimately settled, and my grandfather was a foreman at Seaview Ranch off the Salton Sea, and feel very connected to what are a lot of challenges that remind me, not unlike here at the Tulare Basin, as I drove in. I drove in actually yesterday evening after concluding at about 7 o'clock a racial equity action plan at the board workshop, and an important discussion there too. It reminds me of the challenges that we face around, say, climate change or other legacy issues that we're all here amidst us reconciling. And I think that that's what is a word that often comes to mind when I think of the board's work, when I think of our collective work, is that we're reconciling systems that we've all inherited. Those can be sociological systems, those can be economic systems, and as we saw from the chart, we're shifting. We're shifting the way that we actually view those systems. And what's important to note is that especially here in California, and especially here in this basin, we have programs and discussions that are happening that you don't see nationally, that you rarely see internationally, around how we're going to manage our water, how we're going to manage the quality of our water. I think of programs that some of you may be aware of, like CV Salts, which is a regional board program, a water board program, that is trying to manage salts and nutrients for the long term. And importantly, trying to understand how we ensure that communities are still provided safe drinking water in our communities as we deal with those legacy issues, as we reconcile those challenges. But those legacy and challenges that we're reconciling are also in the face of what is this shifting climate, this changed climate, I think we can all acknowledge. And so that means with even more so, our task seems a little insurmountable, but it isn't, because there's a direct nexus between reconciling those issues and reconciling our water systems for this 21st century, where we know that we no longer can depend on a snowpack, where there will be a continued shift in timing of flows in our basin. And so it means we have to think of the way water moves through our system, the way we use it, the way we reuse it, importantly, and ensure that we shift these systems in a way that are actually going to help us manage them into the future. So, I think it's important here to take a moment and reflect that we're actually celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. We're also celebrating the 10th anniversary of the passage of the Human Right to Water in California. And so when I say that the discussions that we're having around, say, water quality with CV salts, or drinking water because of the Human Right to Water passage a decade ago, or even just generally water quality, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, what we have are examples of us actually addressing challenges that we've had. And here is what gives me hope for the fact that we can here actually address what we're being faced with. But it's going to require us to really think differently about our roles, about the work that we're all called to do. And there's a lot of political division. There's a lot of distrust in government, even. And so I think those are all things to be important to acknowledge, because it can be, the regulatory programs that we've developed over 50 years can be a little abstract. As the chair of the state board and someone who we're involved in very technical discussions, it can seem a little far removed, the decision making that's going on. And I think that what we need to do is continue to, and here, the five of us at the state board, the board members, we're all kind of given a specialization. We have water attorneys, we have sanitary sewer engineers, we have those like Dee Dee with specialization in water quality and agriculture, and then I hold the public seat. And so, I often think, what is it that the public seat is supposed to bring that those other specializations were specifically called out for? And I feel is that it's to connect, ultimately, the work of the board, ensure that it's explained fairly, and ensure that our decision making is actually based off of the input of those that are actually impacted by our policies. And again, after 50 years of evolution of these regulatory programs, it can seem a bit opaque. And so what we've continued to try to do is really use our website and use our modern tools to communicate at least the information that the board has, There, I think of our drinking water needs assessment. I think of the groundwater ambient monitoring assessment program. I think of tools that ultimately can help support the local decision making that's going on at Sigma in all of these spaces, and hopefully in ways that help us get to better solutions amongst us. And so it's a complete honor to be here to be able to open up this discussion. I think I suffer from always wanting to say perhaps too much. And so really welcome and open the room for any questions to me. So I can actually better reflect what might be some input.
I'll be the backup referee, but you can point to people.
Thanks.
I'm sure you're fully capable, but go ahead. Anybody in the room have a question? You only get a chance at him every once in a while, so I might as well ask. Any limitation on questions?
No, not at all.
Okay, good. Okay, so there's no such thing as a dumb one. So go ahead and start with that if you want to. Anybody who's got one? Josh.
Josh Fears, East Summerside. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll give you a really easy question. What's the state of the voluntary agreements?
Yeah. Well, and I'm not negotiating the VAs, but I think what is important to that discussion is the fact that we are in the middle of, when I say reconciling systems, the last time the water quality control plan was updated was in the mid-90s. And what happened then was there was an agreement. And for those of you that don't know, the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, when we talk about the board's work and what's central to it are these basin plans. Basin plans, they outline what are all the water bodies, whether they're rivers, lakes, streams, bays, estuaries, and then starts to say, well, what are the beneficial uses from them? What are people using them for? How do you ensure you protect those uses? And uniquely, most of that work is done at the Regional Water Quality Control Board level. But the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan is at the state board. So the last time the board updated was in the mid-90s. And the agreement then was that the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project were going to meet all those water quality standards in the Delta. Most of those standards were based off of salinity within the Delta. And what happened after that moment was the Endangered Species Act came out. The Endangered Species Act came, it created further, because of declining smelt and salmonids, created more constraints on the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project, those major conveyances of water, and became, as I think many of you are well aware here, the punching bag around water management. Now, what the state has said is we need to update the Water Quality Control Plan. And we need the Water Quality Control Plan to be updated because it's not the Endangered Species Act. It's actually far greater. It's based off of state law, Porter Cologne, which was the model for the Clean Water Act, and is actually the law that the board's work is based off of. And in Porter Cologne, it's not about a species going extinct and trying to ensure that operations don't contribute to it. It's actually about how to support all the beneficial uses in the basin. And so what we're trying to do is move away from this idea that you have a single species that you just need to be focused on, but instead, how do we look at that watershed scale? So much of what very aligned with what the discussions we're all having in so many of the watersheds we're in. And it's not an easy thing. And so at this point, the state board has adopted standards for the lower San Joaquin. We still need to adopt standards for the Sacramento and the Delta, but we're beginning to implement those standards in the lower San Joaquin. And amongst that are voluntary agreements that are being negotiated by the administrations and the secretaries. And what those seek to do is be bureaucratic, but a program of implementation, meaning that those VAs are going to implement these standards that the board has set. And so there's this work and dance around it. And the reason why you have a voluntary agreement versus say maybe, well, why doesn't the board just say what the standard is and apply it to everybody? Is because there are ways of being able to elicit the same outcomes, have people work together, come to the table, see what they can give up. It isn't just a regulatory approach, if you will, that would just kind of mete out, whether through water rights or a regulatory process, how you would achieve those standards, how you would achieve that amount in the rivers. And so the VAs have had several milestones. I think there's an MOU out there. Importantly, the board is looking to make sure we complete our work. We have to complete the Water Quality Control Plan update. It's been since the mid-90s since that was updated, and it hasn't really incorporated what we know is a lot of science around how we really support our ecosystems and our watersheds. And as you saw from the graphic, the important graphic there, this shift is really about ensuring that our systems, our economic systems, our social systems, our society is actually within the bubble of the ecology that can support those systems. We've grown, we've kind of disconnected in ways. I mean, I think, I touched on the theme of, and maybe too many themes of reconciling these systems that we have. But that's where a lot of this discontinuity comes in. We made decisions, disconnected floodplains, disconnected habitats, did things that stopped groundwater recharge, stopped the processes, if you will, the ecologies that supported what we have to admit, prior to the last 200 years of what we've been able to develop, which is incredible. This fifth largest economy in the world, 40 million people. We do have a lot to be proud of, but it came at some cost, and I think that reconciling those costs now is really what is on us. And importantly, the Water Quality Control Plan is a tool. We have tools, we have laws, we have ways in which we can have these discussions that move us forward, that don't, and they're not easy. And so the VA is trying to make that a little easier by having that buy-in with folks. But it's not an uncomplex system that we've developed for ourselves. I think the Water Rights Administration that the board has had to do in the last year, the first time in history, we have to note that we've actually curtailed. Other Western states curtail far more often, and as a regular practice. And again, there too, that work is really kind of keeping us within our budgets. And what is actually being provided us, and how do we maintain within it? And I think wholly the same spirit of Sigma as well. Again, there's these common threads, I think, between. So thank you. Appreciate the question.
What role will the Water Board play in the obvious competition between ag and city municipal uses? And will there be boundaries set up, or what role will they play? Because I hear comments about a new development to prove water. And when I ask the developer, how do you prove water? He says, well, I just talked to the municipal supplier. And he said, yeah, you can have water. So it seems out of balance to me. Is there a role for the Water Resources Board?
A light one at this point, because those are local and sometimes land use issues in a way. What I'll flag, though, is that a lot of that decision making is pegged, on the urban side at least, how developers get guarantee of water have to show. It's through urban water management plans. And I'll be candid, and if you look at some of those management plans, sometimes there's assumptions that aren't really aligned to the reality of what we're seeing. I've seen some that they're still assuming like a 50% delivery from the state water project, say. When we know that the reliability of that is declining, and there are challenges there. So I think what I think is in common amongst that is that we get real about the math. And the board doesn't have any oversight over urban water management plans. Those are at the Department of Water Resources. And I think that's where what I'm really proud of, at least, is we have been working a lot more closely with the Department of Water Resources and really seeing these issues as ones of sort of the state needing to help not have two agencies, but maybe sometimes differing opinions. And I think mostly in Sigma, I'll flag, it's been the case. We've been able to make great gains. But that aside, getting people to really match up to what is actually going to be available, what can we, in this changing climate, actually assume we can have is going to be important. When it comes to, and then further your question, so there's that aspect, that balance between ag and urban, and who referees that. The board has some role, but I would point to things. Right now, as we all know, the Colorado River is in dire straits. Like so many of our watersheds in the West, the Bay Delta is not alone. The Colorado River is there as well. And so we're all trying to say, how do we reduce? And part of that reduction discussion, and you see the tension play out in the press, is how much of it is ag, how much of it is urban, how much of it is dictated by either the federal government or others to say how much that will be. And what we at least have history of here on that river is folks working it out amongst themselves, not needing to have the big heavy hand come in, but have rational discussions. And I think that that's where, I think there's the most promise. But there does, become a moment where I know folks, they want to see the board referee more and say, just call it. What percentage will lag get here? What percentage will urban? But I think that what we need to make sure we just create is the foundations of the decision making that allow all of us to collectively make those decisions in our own power, but seeing the same reality of what we actually are needing to be paid to. And so I think that, water rights comes to mind, and that's why it's so fundamental. I know sometimes I'm quoted as saying, here to change water rights, just here to administer water rights, to modernize water rights. We haven't actually given ourselves the benefit of administering a system there that, again, is meant to actually keep us within what's actually available. And on the urban side, urban water management plans and other tools try to do the same. And I think, again, what's continuous to those two is how do we get more serious about the math? And then allow for discussions around trading and sharing and supporting what we know is an important continuum between ag and our urban sector. Not a hard cutoff where you need to kind of pit between the two. But there's tensions there for sure. Hopefully that was helpful. I know.
So I'm gathering that the State Water Board doesn't really have any say in that balance or the equitable distribution, but other than to work together to figure out what we've got and how to share it?
Not without sort of like heavy hand in it, I feel, or at least an unwelcomed hand, it feels like sometimes, and for folks. But I will say, we, on the water rights side at least, we haven't actually adjudicated any basins in the state for like 40 years, meaning, kind of get everyone together, say, what can you prove up, do you have your rights, and get folks in order. But there is a glimmer. The Fresno River continues to request, I think here most recently again, some intervention to try to have an adjudication. And so those are those moments, those are those balancing moments, if you will, that the board does have, but we're still new at actually engaging in some of it. And I think it's why, I try to plead as much good faith as I can in all of that, because I know it can seem concerning or scary for to have the state, the board to come in, and folks feel like you're at the mercy of that balance. But I think we need to be doing more of it, and I hope that the way we've administered water rights, at least here, even in emergency basis, the last year, it's giving folks some comfort that we're not here to play gotcha, but we are a bit behind on our homework.
Richard, we got 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Quick question.
Somebody had to miss somebody up in front.
Oh yeah, please.
Hi. Basins like this one that are critically overdrafted, recharge is a top priority, but water quality is a concern, I think, of the State Water Board. Could you just talk about how you see those two things working out?
Yeah, I think when I feel very honored to be part of the board, because you look at Porter Cologne and it said you have to manage quantity and quality at the same time. That you don't really, if you divorce the two, you kind of get yourself in catch-22s on them, and instead you kind of have to think of them as a little more kind of holistically. And on the quality side, especially salts and nitrates, nutrients and nitrate, these are kind of, the horizons are decadal, right? And their remediation and their fixing, they were decadal in their creation. And so they kind of shift a little more slowly, and I think some people, it's easy to kind of forget that part of what are really dire quantity issues that are pressing on the basin. But I think that what's really interesting is the innovation. I hear discussions here in the basin and here, throughout the San Joaquin around, yes, there are communities that are pulling up contaminated groundwater. It's more expensive to treat that. There is surface water that comes into the basin that, maybe there are opportunities to better think of the way water is delivered in that quality way, Because ultimately, especially on the drinking water side, it's quality that will ultimately drive your affordability issues. And you think of countries like Denmark, right, where they have pristine groundwater. They have many, many systems, and so do we here. We're trying to consolidate them, but you can have many systems if you're pulling up water and not having to treat it. It's just the cost of distribution. You can have that sort of model. But I think here, because of our contaminated groundwater systems, we have to start to think, how do we extend municipal and or surface flows that are cleaner to communities that can pivot off. And actually, ag is okay pulling up water that has nitrates in it. It's part of your calculations as you then apply. But it really takes our communities seeing those systems in common and finding those opportunities. So the nexus though with recharge, we do have to be mindful. There are going to be places that are more ideal for recharge because you're not going to see a huge loading of nitrates as you try to recharge those lands. And so, balancing that out is important. But you may have some instances, actually, and this is where the science is just so important around it all. And so fortunate that UC Merced has brought us together here, and that we have these institutions to help us suss this out. But you may have increased loading for a time, and then afterwards have really great quality being able to move through. And so knowing that even is good and helpful. So I apologize. I know I went a little. I'll still take the questions just so that I have them, and I can go sneak back there and respond. And everyone else has the benefit of hearing them too.
Good morning. Richard Harriman. I'm really pleased to have you attend the conference today. Could you comment regarding some of the reports that came out in the last couple of weeks that the legislature was considering acquiring senior riparian rights in the Sacramento River? I couldn't tell whether it related to acquiring them in the public trust or whether that might be a tool that would be used to provide more quantity for the other uses you've discussed this morning.
Yeah, thank you. And let me take the second question as well, and then I'll try to just knock them out and then run off. I know in like 0 minutes, and I hate to extend folks.
You're the chairman. You do what you want.
It's just I don't actually get. I really appreciate it, especially in the space of this opportunity.
Chairman, related to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, with a lot of GSAs have submitted their draft groundwater sustainability plans. They've gotten responses from DWR. Responses have gone back to DWR. How involved is the state board in reviewing the GSBs and the revisions on them?
We don't have nearly as many. Okay, I'll start first. We need to be able to reconcile the system, right? There is a need for more flow in these ecosystems. How we acquire that, whether it's purchase, and I think people should be compensated. I think that's important for the legislature to be contemplating. I try not to wander too much into what the legislature is doing. They're doing a lot, and we hear. I think it's an important concept. I know it comes with questions, right? At what price is it permanent? What other uses would that go to otherwise? There's a lot to additionally unpack, but I think it is important that we see an active legislature thinking of how they support all of us in this work that we're trying to do. And compensating people for things is helpful because it helps us actually get to these outcomes, I think. So, and then your question around Sigma and coordination. We don't have nearly as many staff as DWR does. They're doing really the full plan evaluation. We're supplementing as we can. We send letters, we have meetings with them around as they do GSP evaluation so that we're providing them a basis of information for them to do good decision making in areas like water rights or water quality or drinking water that the board has particular expertise in. So, okay. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it.